Good evening, everyone. Let's set our motivation. My experience of 2013 is that there have been an unprecedented number of deaths. And today, I found out a few hours ago, another person left. Nelson Mandela died today. He was 95 years old. And so some of us may remember hearing about a police raid on the ANC in 1963. And they uncovered documents about an ANC guerrilla movement called Umkhonto we Sizwe, which means Spear of the Nation. This is a movement that Mandela helped found in 1961. Umkhonto claimed to have carried out more than 70 acts of sabotage against the government. Nelson Mandela was charged with treason and sabotage. During the trial, Mandela declared from the dock, "I have cherished the idea of a democratic and free society in which all persons will live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an idea for which I hope to live and see. But my Lord, if it need be, it is an idea for which I am prepared to die." Mandela spent 18 years in Robben Island prison. During that time he was forced to quarry limestone, harvest seaweed, and endured brutality from the guards. In total, he spent 27 years in prison. And so, in the coming days and weeks, as we reflect on our memories of Nelson Mandela and what he accomplished, we can all look deeply and ask ourselves, what sacrifices am I willing to endure for the sake of others? So tonight, as we listen to the review of Venerable Children's teachings on Chapter 2 of Aryadeva's 400 stanzas, we can think more about this and ask ourselves, am I working hard at satisfying every sense pleasure that I can possibly experience? Or am I devoting my time and energy to transforming my mind so that I can get out of cyclic existence for the benefit of all sentient beings? So, good evening, everyone. We're having our first time Thursday night review talk in the beautiful dining room of Chenrezig Hall. I have to tell you, though, what has just taken place, because otherwise I'll probably be smiling where I shouldn't be smiling. At 6:25 today, we discovered, we were set up in Chenrezig Hall, ready to go and start meditating, and we discovered that the telephone line wasn't going to work. The wiring isn't set up for it, so we thought, fine, we'll move back to Ananda and we'll stream the teaching from there and the telephone will work. And so we all picked up and took the stuff back to Ananda, and lo and behold, there's one component of the sound system that wasn't there, and so we came back here with at least 8 minutes to spare. So here we are, impermanence. So tonight I'll be going through what Venerable Children taught on Chapter 2, Aryadeva's 400 stanzas. And there's so much material, I won't get through it. So I think what I'll do is I'll just keep my eye on the clock, and at about 20 to 7, if I'm really not even halfway there, I'm going to start skipping chapters. So you may notice that some things are missing, because I don't want to talk faster. It's just, there's such rich material here. But I thought for people who are maybe tuning in tonight for the first time, I would just give a quick review and a little highlight of what Chapter 1 addresses, and then we'll dive into Chapter 2. So Chapter 1 is countering the distortion of seeing what is impermanent as permanent. And what really got my attention with this chapter was the strong advice that Gyaltsab Je gives. And he was saying this: since the path to generate insight is blocked until an awareness of death and impermanence has arisen in the mind, continually meditate on coarse death and subtle impermanence. The importance of building a solid foundation. You're not going to be successful in your spiritual aspirations to generate serenity and insight if you don't have a deep awareness of coarse and subtle impermanence. So this is really significant. I mean, if we don't get that part now, then we're blocked from developing insight and serenity. And then, as we all know from Venerable Children's earlier teachings, without that we can't possibly develop direct insight into emptiness. And without that, forget Buddhahood. So it's like a major roadblock right at the beginning. So we have to really generate this awareness every single day. And as Geshe Tabke said this July, he said, we have to say to ourselves, today is the day that I could die, or I will die. He also said this is Geshe Tabke: daily cultivate an awareness of death without developing anxiety, which is not so easy to do, I think. With constant awareness, we'll make good use of our life and become better persons at the same time. Continually thinking I could die at any moment urges us to make good use of the time we have. As our mind becomes more virtuous, we'll have no regrets. We'll have this desire to improve relationships with others, given the fact that everything dies and everything comes to an end. So he said we have to really develop this joyful attitude rather than fear. And when we understand that we have another day to be of benefit, or even if we find out we have a few months, that's all we have left, that's what we find out tomorrow, then everything we do will have much greater meaning, and we'll see it as an opportunity to not only improve ourselves, but really benefit others. So that was a highlight from Chapter 1. Chapter 2 counters the distortion of what is by nature dukkha, or unsatisfactoriness, as pleasurable. And even though I've spent many days on this chapter, I cannot believe my own huge ignorance, because I'll read one of these verses, and as you recall, if you have been listening to Venerable's teachings, she'll refer to the person doing the yes buts as Joe Blow. This could easily be, this is Thupten Samten. This is many people. And so I think for tonight I won't call a person Joe Blow, I'll just say the deluded mind when these arguments come up. But, I mean, it's so clear, it's so straightforward what he's saying, and yet when I look at what I do hour to hour, day by day, I am looking for that pleasure that I'm convinced that I can have. And intellectually I know what he's talking about, but I'm still doing this search. So you may see if this is true for you as you hear some of these verses tonight. So verse 26, although the body is seen like a foe, nevertheless it should be protected. By long sustaining a disciplined one, a great merit is created. So, our polluted body, and polluted means under the influence of ignorance, afflictions, and karma, is a source of suffering, dukkha, unsatisfactoriness, because it is damaged by internal causes such as illness and external causes such as accidents, car crashes, bees, allergies, you name it. So we've got internal and external things constantly that we have to deal with. Our body is like a foe because it makes us miserable. Nevertheless, we should properly protect the body from deterioration. A precious human body is the basis on which we can practice in this life. By sustaining an ethically disciplined body for a long period of time, we're then going to have the opportunity to create a lot of merit and generate wisdom and bodhicitta. So, this body is our foe. By nature, it's unsatisfactory. The body brings us pain. However, we have to keep this understanding in balance because the body is the foundation upon which we can practice in this life. So obviously, we have to keep it healthy. And this understanding that we have to keep it healthy should dispel the doubt that thinks, well, maybe if I were a real Dharma practitioner, I don't need to care about this body. I'll just do whatever I can, and I'll eat less, and I'll prostrate more, and I'll sleep less, and I'll just go for it and do all of these very severe practices, and likely we'll end up really sick and depressed, and we may even throw in the towel and run away to Thailand, something like that. So we have to balance this understanding that the body is the foe, but we have to care for it. And this gives import to feeding our body with nutritious food and getting enough rest, getting exercise, going to the doctor if problems arise. So we need to attend to our body so it can function as well as it can, given the circumstances that we're in. That we're in a body that over time is going to lose strength, it's going to become sick, it's continually aging, we're heading towards death. That story. So as I continually see, as I look around at people who do care for their bodies, I see there's huge benefits in staying active and eating properly. And not only does it give the body sustained vitality, it seems, but it also keeps the mind sharper, at least in the people that I've noticed who are more active. So at the same time, though, we don't want to freak out and sort of over-focus on our body, and every time we have an ache or pain, go on the internet, which is deadly. Let me tell you, I've diagnosed myself with some pretty fatal illnesses over the past few years. And really, this pain in my stomach, if I waited long enough, it's really just a little bit of gas, and it's going to pass. But anyway, the middle way is always good. Okay, so the deluded mind jumps in and says, okay, if the body has to be protected, one should pamper it with food and clothing. And the answer to this is verse 27. When human suffering is produced by the body and pleasure by other factors, why are you devoted to this hull, a container of suffering? So human suffering is produced by this body. The body is always uncomfortable. And it isn't that this discomfort starts in old age. It starts when we're young. And it starts from a small discomfort to a very large, excruciating pain. So if you just take a look at how your body is, maybe you can remember the first time that you sat in a Dharma talk. Maybe you can remember your first retreat and what it was like sitting there. And I remember going into the meditation hall thinking, I'm a privilege. Piece of cake. What my friend told me. It's not going to happen to me. And then within a few minutes, the pillow's too hard, the pillow's too high. Oh, the room's too hot, the room's too cold. And then hips start to ache, knees start to ache, and you're trying not to move, but you have to move, and on, and you're just waiting for the gong to ring, and when it's going to be lunch. That's the human body. At least that's my experience. And I think we'll see this again actually on December 9th, this Monday. We're going to have a 2-week Tara retreat, and so most of us haven't been sitting for a while. And probably after about 2 or 3 sessions, we'll all be sort of, listening for the bell to ring, to signal that we can stand up and take a break. That's what we've got with this body. So we also have this mistaken idea that pleasure is caused by other things. A great cup of coffee, endlessly tweaking the recipe to make the best pancakes in the world, searching for the perfect sound system to play our growing collection of CDs, filling our home with aromatherapy candles, having the latest Lululemon yoga clothes. If you don't know Lululemon, it's a very groovy line of clothing in Canada. Beautiful hand-milled soaps from France, carrot cake made by our own children. Of course, we haven't seen that carrot cake much this year. So, I guess what we can continue asking ourselves is, why are we devoted to this body, which is a container of suffering? When really what we have to do is just care for it enough so that it's healthy. Healthy enough to practice, but not painful. So then the deluded mind perks up and then says this: although pain occurs only because of the body, since it can be alleviated, it is weak and pleasure's greater. Therefore, one doesn't fear pain. And the answer to that is, when humans do not have as much pleasure as pain, should so much pain be considered negligible? So, when Venerable Children was teaching this, she said, we have this way of thinking, yeah, okay, so the body's uncomfortable, that's true, but when I get sick, I can get some medicine. If I'm injured, I can go to the doctor. There's always some remedy to the pain. I can get acupuncture for my digestion, which is always a little bit off. I can go for a massage and get rid of those aches. And I'll go to my friend who's really good with crystals, and that'll help my circulation. Or I'll just do whatever I have to do, and I can take care of it, because I've got either the friends or a little bit of money. And I can get so much pleasure from this body. So why should I fear the pain? And Aryadeva responds with this. He says, we experience strong pain and very little pleasure. Should we consider the pain as negligible? If our body is painful and uncomfortable most of the time, why should we consider that negligible? And then he says this, which is really quite strong. We're always on the edge of a cliff, and any small thing makes us uncomfortable. Why consider pain negligible? We should instead have aversion for samsara. We're basically walking on the edge of a cliff day by day. We don't know when we wake up in the morning what's going to happen that day. So if you think of people that you know, I can think of a growing list of people who one day they woke up. In the case of this one friend, she just noticed something sort of unusual in her neck. It seemed like maybe a swollen gland. Didn't think much about it. A week went by, that swollen gland was still there. And she went to the doctor, and it turns out she had lymphoma. One day healthy, the next day not. We have homes that are designed to protect us, and recently there was this incredible tragedy in the Philippines where homes were just blown apart, so many people died in huge, huge numbers. So we should have aversion for samsara, Aryadeva says. We aren't about potential suffering and then getting afraid. We don't want to have panic or dread. This is not what we should do. What we want to do is develop this strong, strong aversion for samsara, so that we don't have to repeatedly take this body under the influence of afflictions and karma. Trying to protect the body from pain is futile. The body's nature is to feel painful and uncomfortable. If we don't like having a body with that nature, then we should seek liberation, in which we won't be craving and clinging for that kind of body, and so we won't take another body in that way. So when I read that line again, the body's nature is to feel painful and uncomfortable. I continually forget it, and I continually, I think, don't believe it until I'm experiencing pain. But pain comes so often. So, verse 29, ordinary people are
Those who have pleasure are hard to find. Thus it is as if transitory beings are pursued by suffering. So it's hard to find anyone who has a comfortable body. Why? Well, our body by nature is uncomfortable because it's under the influence of addictions and karma. And we've created this kind of negative karma in previous lives. And so this is all going to ripen as painful feelings now. And it's going to ripen in more pain in the future. So taking this body is a result of pollution, which is ignorance and karma. And it is the source through which we generate more ignorance and afflictions. We do negative actions which bring suffering, and this pursues us like a shadow. It's hard to abandon. So right now, when I think about my body, I'm not really experiencing any pain right now. And so then this is how my thinking goes. This is what I expect. I expect it to function at a high level of energy. I want it to be fluid. I want to have lots of strength. It should be very flexible. It should do whatever I want it to do right now. And then when it doesn't perform in that way, I get really ticked off. And then I think there's something wrong. But actually, there's not something wrong here. When those things happen, it's just the way of the body. And I think it's wrong. And then, of course, because we're in this body that's moment by moment aging, heading towards death, it's going to let us down. It's going to break apart. It's letting us down. I mean, it's breaking apart right now. It's moment by moment disintegrating. It's just that I don't have the capacity to see that right now. And moment by moment, it's going to get older and older, and with this loss of vitality and strength, it's going to get sick. And then this weakness continues until death. And this is the nature of the body. I remember years ago when I bought my first car, somebody told me, well, you know, in a few years it's going to be a scrap heap. And I was really insulted, and I was really ticked off, and I said, what do you mean it's a brand new car? And my friend said, well, look, the nature of metal is to rust. In a few years you're going to have a scrap heap. That's just the way it is. And this is the way it is with our body. Our body is the nature of suffering. It's going to bring us pain. That's what it does. Verse 30. Suffering is found at will, but what pleasure is there at will? Why do you value the rare, but do not fear the plentiful? So suffering is found easily. It's always nearby without a lot of effort. And in fact, as Aryadeva says in this text, we actually have to exert a lot of energy to get happiness. We have to exert a lot of energy to be comfortable. We have to exert a lot of energy just to find pleasure of any kind. And so everyone in the room here, at a certain point, for a certain number of years, we all held down jobs in the world. And look how hard we had to work just to pay rent, have food to eat, to pay for the utilities. So there's so much effort required to get pleasure, and it doesn't come all the time either. Pain, on the other hand, which really requires no effort at all and is readily available, it seems like we have no fear of that because we think we can just get more pleasure. With medicine, I can heal my illness. And besides, there's so many fun, exciting things to do that can bring you pleasure. So it's not that bad. We really think that this body, which is a source of pain is a source of pleasure. And everything in society is telling us that exact message. Everywhere you look. So, of course, we don't have billboards at the Abbey, but we all go into town to do different things, and we're bombarded by these messages that we can make this body, we can have experience by giving the body all the sense pleasures we could possibly experience. So I remember when I was a kid, the Sears catalog would show up shortly after Halloween. And this is a big event. I grew up in a small town. And my brother and sister and I would fight over who would get this catalog. And, you know, it would be, by mid-December, we had every page written on, and we were looking at whatever, every single toy seemed to be the solution to what we would need to be happy. And so we kept making lists based on this catalog, and the list would change, and the page would get torn out, and then there would be a huge, almost fight about where is that page, because my favorite toy is on that. And what I noticed is that, sometimes we got these things, like by December 26th, the toy was sort of fired somewhere in the corner, and we were outside playing in the snow, and pretty soon it was in the toy box with all the other things we forgot about. That's the way it is. We get it, we're happy for a few minutes, and on to the next thing. So at this point, just because I'm a Canadian, I just have to throw this story in. So look at the mayor of Toronto, Rob Ford. You may not know this news, sorry, but this is the latest. It's apparently the biggest story in the United States. Yeah, I know. So when we think about what Rob Ford has been up to, the mayor of Toronto, Canada's biggest city, what's pushing him to engage in these activities? All these things are going to really end up with him losing his job as mayor, and he's almost there now. And there's more and more news coming out about this guy every day. I mean, certainly he's going to end up in jail if what people are saying is true. And so I feel sadness for this guy, because all he's trying to do is he's just trying to get more pleasure. So if you haven't heard about Rob Ford, he's the mayor who's allegedly, yes, thank you. Allegedly, with gang members. Allegedly, there's a video showing him smoking crack cocaine. Allegedly, there's more stories about him hanging out with biker gangs. Allegedly, now he's also has some kind of heroin problem. And when they ask him about these things, he just sort of laughs and doesn't answer and doesn't say yes or no. But the media's having a heyday with it, and so who knows? But apparently the Americans are getting a big kick out of this story. Verse 31. A comfortable body is a container of suffering, thus valuing the body and valuing the soul both seem alike. So the more we indulge in pleasure, the more it brings immediate suffering. What? Is that true? The more we indulge in suffering or in pleasure, the more it brings immediate suffering. Well, it is true, because pleasure isn't going to last for long, and it won't bring long-term suffering in the future, because we create so much negative karma trying to procure and protect pleasure now. So when I thought about this one, I really did say, what? And then I thought about a story that a friend told me, and this is just one example of millions. I mean, it's true. This friend grew up like the rest of us did, At some point we experimented with alcohol. And this particular person was quite shy, and he found that drinking was really helpful in social circumstances. And so, he'd go to parties on the weekend and drink a lot. And, for a while it was just a weekend thing. And then he went to university and made the fatal mistake of ending up in residence, which is a pretty lethal situation for certain personalities. And he found that, the drinking was really okay in residence, and pretty soon, to deal with his hangovers that he was having, the drinking started to be every day. And of course, the hangovers he found, if he had a drink earlier in the day, then he could sort of get through the day and make it to class, sort of. And pretty soon, he was dropping out of classes, and he was drinking all the time. And he did find it pleasurable, because he was just sort of zoned out most of the time. But then it took a nasty turn. And he started running out of money, of course, because his parents were giving him some money for this university experience that was supposed to be books and studying and not drinking. And so he started borrowing money from people and promising them that he would repay the money, but then he couldn't, and then he started stealing from friends. And pretty soon friends disappeared. He couldn't write exams, of course. He dropped out of university, and then the family got news of this, and they got him into a rehab center. But it could have been, I mean, he was very thankful that he sort of hit rock bottom rather soon. I think it took about 10 months. Because he knows that had he continued doing this pattern, he probably would have been either dead or in jail. And so, you know, it just started as a teenager, just, you know, hanging out and having drinks with friends because in his mind that was the truth. Aryadeva, so I think we can all think of examples where we start off with something and we think it's pleasure. But the longer we do it, it turns into pain and suffering. So I think it's a good time in this chapter to sort of pause here and sort of reframe what we're trying to tackle here, because it's really easy to get the idea that we should despise the body, or, you know, there's no pleasure at all in samsara, and like this is a hopeless state that we're in, and we get very pessimistic and depressed. Aryadeva and the Buddha caution us with the following, that we don't want to hate our body. We just have to see it for what it is. And if we end up hating our body, then that's the afflictive mental state running the show. And hatred is an affliction. So we have to cut this incredible attachment to this body, which causes us suffering now and in the future. What we really need to do is we sort of have to cultivate a state of wisdom fear. So not anxiety fear, but wisdom fear about what's going to happen to this body. Geshe Take also cautions us to understand these teachings. And he says the danger of this chapter 2 is that we'll conclude that we need to despise the body, and he says this really has to be, this kind of thinking has to be abandoned. We have to really get a balanced view of the body and see. Chapter 32. The body, however long one spends, will not in itself become pleasurable. To say its nature can be overruled by other factors is improper. So, the body will not become pleasurable. The body is a product of afflictions and karma. Whatever we do, we're never going to make the nature of the body anything beyond unsatisfactoriness, because it's a product of afflictions and karma. And this body is under the control of afflictions and karma. We're not going to change the nature of this body that has been born this way. So, the deluded mind raises its head again and says, its nature cannot be suffering, for those of royal caste and so forth have nothing but pleasurable feelings from birth to death. And the answer to that is, the high have mental suffering, for the common it comes from the body. Day by day, both kinds of suffering overwhelm people in the world. So it's really quite inappropriate to think that the wealthy people don't have suffering. Like everyone else, their body's breaking down moment by moment. Wealthy people get sick. For sure, they may have more access to better health care, but the mental suffering that the wealthy experience from different factors is certainly very extreme too. It makes me think of a person that I used to know. She and her husband used to travel the world in the 60s and the 70s, and they went to all kinds of fascinating places because he was a government official. And they lived in Afghanistan and Iraq and Iran, and they were art people as well. So they, everywhere they went, they collected things, and then they went back to their home in Europe. And I was really sad to hear later, after this woman's husband passed away, she was living in an apartment by herself. I think this is still the case. And she's now afraid to go over to her apartment because she's afraid that someone will come and rob her of her most precious things. And she has, for sure, beautiful things. I'm sure that, they're museum quality. But as a result of this, grasping and clinging to her beautiful things, she's a prisoner in her apartment. And she has so much to offer. I mean, such a warm-hearted person, and I think it's really created a state of mental imbalance where she just doesn't go out, which is really tragic. And then I thought I'd give you a sample of what the wealthy people can experience in a certain hotel that I won't name in Alberta. It's world famous. And so if you have endless fistfuls of money, you can stay at this resort hotel in it's an extraordinary setting. And, you know, the rooms per night are at least $400. But, of course, you want to take care of the body while you're there. So these are some of the prices that you could pay, that you'd have to pay, because once you're there, you know, you've got to take care of your body. So, this is 2013 prices. For women, you can have a 4-handed massage for 60 minutes at $375. Or you could get a mountain stone treatment for 60 minutes for $285. Or you could have the diamond radiance facial for 90 minutes at $285. Or you could get the ultimate caviar facial for $275. Caviar. Or you could get the tranquil face and back experience, not sure what that is, for $275. Or you can get, most important, age-correcting facial for $255. You get the glacial reflection facial, for $255. And then, of course, you don't want to stop there. You want to go beyond Botox for $215. Now, that's the women. Now, of course, they have something for men. There's something called stress relief. For 3.5 hours. It doesn't say what you get. It's $435. So, you know, if you're there with your partner, and your partner's off for 3.5 hours for $435, but the women only get the 4-handed massage for $375. I'd be complaining. The men can also get, oh my, never mind. All right, the deluded mind perks up and says, though these two kinds of suffering exist, one does not notice them because great pleasure makes them insignificant. And the answer to that is, pleasure is governed by thoughts. Thoughts are governed by pain. Thus, there is nothing anywhere more powerful than pain. Okay, this one just sort of set me back the other day when I read this. Pleasure is governed by thoughts. Okay, sure. But the next one. Thoughts are governed by pain. There's nothing anywhere more powerful than pain. So when Venerable Shorten was teaching this, she was explaining that pleasure depends on thoughts. Okay? Thoughts are governed by pain. There's this arising and cessation of pleasure, and that's governed by thoughts. So we can be having a physical sensation of pleasure, and then in a moment, something can happen in our mind, and we're fearful. So, or we think of something extraordinarily sad, or someone says something to us that we absolutely hate. And I'll share another story that just sort of is rather heartbreaking, but it's a true story. And actually, I've heard this story from more than one friend. So in the case of one person, she was with her husband at a resort, and it was some holiday. And everything was perfect. You know, they were walking along the beach. It was warm, gorgeous weather. There was a warm breeze blowing, but not too hard. They just had a fabulous meal. They were looking forward to some activity, I don't know, parasailing or something. And in this case, it was her husband, and he just turned to her and he said, well, honey, I have something to tell you. I don't love you anymore, and I'd like to get a divorce. So you can see, you know, I mean, her life, I mean, I think she almost fell down. She didn't see it coming. It was just all in this, you know, exquisite sense, bliss state, and kaboom. And her life, she said it felt like she just sort of, you know, shattered into a million pieces. Yeah. Thoughts are driven by pain. There's nothing anywhere more powerful than pain. All right, I'm going to skip ahead a bit just so that I can get to the things I want to hit for sure. And then I can come back to these. Okay. All right. This is verse 39. When you have spent, are spending, and will spend time dying, it is not at all proper to call the process of dying pleasurable. So Aryadeva says, it's not suitable to call the process of dying pleasurable. Conditioned things disintegrate in each moment. From the moment we're born, we're headed towards death. We are spending time dying right now. When this is the situation, it is ridiculous to call the process of dying pleasurable. And then it was really brilliant. At this point, the little children pointed out something that we all do. And she said, well, but we don't think of ourselves as dying. We think of ourselves as living. That's our language. That's our thinking. Which means we are having the possibility of pleasure. Dying happens to other people. And it happens later on. In my case, it's going to happen much later on. And then we have this idea, she said, that we'll probably start dying, well, 10 seconds before we die. And it'll be this very gentle, peaceful, Hollywood style, the person gets quiet. It's just the last expiration. That's it. And the reality is that death usually is not like that. And so you might want to think about, when you do the death meditation, what script are you playing? And I found out this year I was playing a script previously that has nothing to do with what will likely happen. And so what we might want to do, but not to be sort of, not to get, I think you have to do this carefully. You don't want to do this meditation when you're depressed. But I think we have to develop other scripts where our death is prolonged, the dying process is prolonged, that we use our mental capacity, and that we're in actually extraordinary great pain, and be prepared for that. I have to do that because I see now that this is certainly the way it is. And venerable children, in fact, told me at one point, dying isn't pretty. It's painful. How could it not be? The body, the physical body, when you're dying, is breaking apart. And unless you're medicated over the hill, with morphine, and even with morphine, I see the people dying have pain. So I think I have to prepare myself in this way. I have to do more kinds of meditation where it's more realistic and not based on the Verse 40, when beings with bodies are constantly afflicted by hunger and so forth, it is not at all proper to call being afflicted pleasurable. So life in samsara isn't pleasurable. So we may get the promotion or the recognition that we worked so hard to get. And when we do get these things that we work so hard for, it brings other problems, if we're honest with ourselves. So when I think about that, I can remember in 1993, my friend and I bought a house. And I was thrilled because I thought, great, I'm not moving ever again. And this little house is going to be a home. Finally, I'm going to have a home, So we buy this cute little house that had been fixed up a bit. And pretty soon, within about 17 hours, we noticed that the wood floors were in tragic shape. So we had to get the wood floors resanded and all that. That wasn't so bad. They looked very nice. And then pretty soon we found that the ice damming problem that we were told wasn't so bad was incredibly bad. So the first winter in the house, the icicles were 17 feet long. Not quite. 2 feet long. Anyways, what happened? And then when they started to melt, all the water that normally in a regular normal, healthy house that would run into the eaves troughs, off, all run inside the house. And of course there wasn't drywall, there was plaster walls because it was an old house. And so 2/3 of the house was completely ruined. And so then, the insurance covered it, but then there was no one to do the work. And, the house was sort of a mess for many months. And then we found out that there was something else wrong with the house. And so that whenever there was a heavy rain, it flooded in the basement. And it was sort of like, you needed a boat downstairs to get from one room to the next. And that was the joy of homeowning. So, I don't know. There's just... Anyway, we can work hard at things and they bring more suffering. Verse 41. Though powerless, the combining of all the elements produces the body. Thus, it is not at all proper to call what is incompatible pleasurable. So, pleasure and pain depend on our body. And our body depends on the elements. Our body is a combination of the elements. But, I never really got this until this teaching. The elements interfere with each other all the time. And as Venerable Children described it, it's a great image. She said it's like 4 or 5 snakes in a bowl. They're all just, going at each other all the time. So if the elements are interfering with each other, then this always causes an imbalance of some kind, and this brings sickness. And we keep thinking this body is a source of pleasure, and it's not. It can't be. It just can't be. It's not set up to be. So Aryadeva says it's not proper to call a collection of incompatible and conflicting factors pleasurable. And he keeps making the point that we think this body is the source of pleasure, and it's not. Okay, I'm going to skip ahead a bit more. Okay, I'm going to skip ahead right now to verse 45. And the deluded mind speaks up again and says, one sees that those intent on pleasure ride horses and elephants, considering it a discomfort to walk on their own 2 feet. Therefore, pleasure does exist. And the answer to that is, there is never any pleasure for humans in riding and so forth. How can that which at the start does not begin, in the end increase? So when we examine what we consider to be pleasure and the causes of pleasure, right from the very beginning, there is slight discomfort. So we're not riding in chariots right now, and most of us aren't riding horseback. But I remember a number of years ago, a friend of a friend had a Cadillac, and it was brand new Cadillac. And so the big deal was we're going to go for a ride in this brand new Cadillac. And it was a very hot summer day, and so the person who had this car was very, very pleased to give us the ride. And so we jumped in this car and we go for a ride on the highway. And the air conditioning was malfunctioning. And because it was such an expensive car, everyone had this little air conditioning unit right beside their seat. But it was all malfunctioning and we couldn't turn it off, and so it was blasting this very, very cold air on everybody. So everybody was freezing to death. But the person wouldn't let us open the windows because the person felt that was not to be done in a Cadillac. I know. And then in the back seat of this Cadillac, there was a little movie screen for the kids. And of course, we were all subjected to listening to Bugs Bunny cartoons. So we're freezing to death listening to Bugs Bunny. That, I'm telling you right now, is suffering. I've had lots of experiences with horses. So I'll just tell you a quick horse story. I tried. My goodness, I tried. Anyway, we were in this place, and it was my cousins and I, and we thought, we'd just go for a fabulous ride in this mountain place. We were renting horses, and when you rent horses, you get what you get. So one of us had the old horse, which goes 1 speed, slow. One of us, I had the cranky horse, and that horse trotted. That's all it did. And then my sister had the horse that liked to gallop. We didn't see my sister for the rest of the ride. She just took off, and she couldn't. My sister's trunk. She couldn't rein in the horse. No matter what she did, this horse just took off, and it was at the next farm. So if you've ever been on a horse trotting, and also because it's a rental situation, the stirrups were too long. So nobody had stirrups that fit. So in my case, it was like this all the time. And then in the case of my friend, she shows up 3 hours later, and she's sunburned because the horse did. The body is pleasurable. Oh, okay. Time to get serious here. Okay. Anything that's done for a long time becomes outright pain. I can tell you it's true. All right. I think I should get serious here. Okay. All right. This is verse 48, and this is really the most impactful verse. So, the deluded mind says, okay, we get it. Real suffering exists. But it's not apparent because pleasure conceals it. And the answer to this is, if common beings do not see suffering because pleasure disguises it, why is there no pleasure which obscures suffering? So there's this wonderful analogy that I'm sure that you'll remember, and I just love reading this and hearing it every time because it's so poignant. So the analogy is this one. There's a person being chased by an elephant. He falls into an old well, and as he or she is falling, he or she stops. I'll just go with he for now, it'll just be easier. He stops himself by grabbing at some grass growing on the side of the well. But there's a rat that starts gnawing at the root of the grass. And as he looks down, there's a huge snake at the bottom of the well waiting for him. And on the sides of the well, there are pythons writhing towards him. And then he notices a little bit of honey that is dropped from somewhere above, and he starts tasting the honey, and he thinks, wow, honey is really great. This is pleasure. And so Aryadeva says, when the childish are being pursued by the elephant of death, we fall into the well of old age. We stop our fall by catching on to the grass on the side of the well, and the grass is our virtuous deeds. Below, the snake of unfortunate rebirths is there, and on the sides, the pythons, the afflictions, writhe towards us. Meanwhile, through all that, the rat gnawing at the root of our virtue continues this, but we're too absorbed in tasting the honey drops to notice that, because we think that this is truly pleasure. And in the meantime, as we're absorbed in all this craving for attractive objects, we're ignorant of the situation that we're in. Completely ignorant. Unaware that the rat is gnawing at the root of our life, and it's going to break through, and in a moment, we're going to die. And then we're going down to meet the snake of the lower realms, or the pythons of afflictions are coming, and they're going to cause a lot of disturbance in this life, making us create a lot of negative karma. So I can certainly see myself in this intense distraction that I can get into, completely obscured to the fact that even though I may be involved in a little bit of virtue, I'm always sort of turning my attention to grasping at that pleasure. Verse 49. Common beings must be told, you are not free from attachment to suffering. Certainly, Tathagatas therefore have said, this is the worst confusion of all. So, I'm a common being. Common beings must be told, you are not free from attachment to unsatisfactoriness. This is the worst confusion of all. Because of our own confusion, we don't realize the nature of psychic existence, that it is unsatisfactory. Thinking that it is pleasurable, you continue to take one rebirth after another in samsara, mistaking what is unsatisfactory for unpleasurable. We're getting attached to what is unsatisfactory. So confusing real suffering with pleasure is one of the worst confusions of all. When we do this, we think our situation in samsara is fine and dandy. And we won't have the wish to practice the Dharma because there's no wish to get out of cyclic existence. So we've got another 4 minutes. I think I'll skip ahead to Venerable's comments on the chapter and again what we need to keep in mind. And maybe I'll start with the summarizing stanza of chapter 2. Abiding in this fathomless ocean of cyclic existence, utterly tormented by the crocodiles of disturbing emotions, what sentient being would not feel aversion, with effort endeavor to attain full awakening? So those of us who see samsara as a pleasure grove are foolish. We don't understand the situation that we're in. And Aryadeva's advice to this is make effort to listen to the teachings, understand the fathomless ocean of cyclic existence, endeavor to attain awakening. And actually reading this right now, I'm just remembering, we heard a teaching by Ramazova Rinpoche last December in India. And it was a rather fragmented teaching, but there was one phrase he kept saying over and over again, and he repeated this, I don't know how many times. But he just kept saying, in every moment we are in grave danger. In every moment we're in grave danger. He said this at least 20 times. And when I left there, I was quite disturbed. Venerable children and Madame children and Jitne left ahead of me, and they left me behind making an offering to Ramazova Rinpoche. So I stayed to his teaching, and then it was totally dark when I got out of his teaching, and I actually had no clue where I was. And then I decided to walk back, and I got lost, and I just kept his voice, every moment in grave danger was really making an impression in my mind. I see now what he's talking about. In every moment we're in grave danger, the moment we don't remember death, the moment we think that we can grab pleasure in this life, we're in danger. So Venerable Children says, confronting our wrong conceptions, stop hallucinating and relate to them as if they are instead. Sorry, I'm going to start over. She says, we've got to confront our wrong conceptions and we have to stop hallucinating. We're constantly creating this la-la land, and we're thinking that samsara is some wonderful heaven, but if we really, when we really get it, we'll see that it's a terrifying state of existence, and when we get that, it's not that we have to be anxious and afraid, but it's going to really prompt us to develop this renunciation to get out of cyclic existence. And then she was saying that in the early days when Westerners were first encountering Buddhism, they really thought that Buddhism was very, very pessimistic. And they misinterpreted what they thought they were hearing, that the Buddha was saying that all life is suffering and there's no hope for anything. But she said, in fact, the Buddha has never ever said that. He didn't say that all life is suffering. What he is continually saying that samsaric life is unsatisfactory. And he was being realistic because he sees that our wrong conceptions are what keep us stuck in an unsatisfactory state. Whereas if we can overcome those wrong conceptions, then there's the possibility to have real joy. And then of course the Buddha sees in all of us our Buddha nature. We have this potential to overcome the things that are obscuring our minds, that are causing us constant misery. And it is because of that wisdom that he has that he taught all of this. He believes that we can actually attain awakening, even if we don't. He's not trying to make us depressed. We don't need to be taught how to do that. So, and then Richard continued to say is that as our wrong views are coming under the harsh blows of reality from the Buddha's teachings, remember that the Buddha is saying all of these things out of his compassion and with great faith in our ability to overcome our obstacles. These teachings are given out of compassion and great faith in our ability to overcome obstacles. He sees our potential and he wants to help. So we're out of time. If one sentence of that was helpful, may we all continue to really confront the mind that is grasping at pleasure, and may we really see the body for what it is. It cannot ever bring pleasure, but to use it skillfully and to continue to work for the benefit of all sentient beings.